Philip Hammond effectively ended austerity today with a £25 billion budget splurge that abolished stamp duty for most first-time buyers and pumped £3 billion into preparing for Brexit. The Chancellor ditched his Spreadsheet Phil reputation for tight money management as he fought to save his job, turning on the spending taps to meet a bewildering array of challenges. Despite the OBR fiscal watchdog wiping billions of pounds off the government's books by slashing growth forecasts, Mr. Hammond ploughed £2.8 billion more into the NHS, £1.5 billion into heading off anger about the new universal credit rollout, and paved the way for significant public sector pay rises. But the most radical move came as he did away with stamp duty on properties worth up to £300,000 in a bold appeal to millennial voters. Homes worth up to £500,000 in high-value areas will also be covered, meaning buyers will only face charges on the £200,000 difference. In total, around 1 million first-time buyers are expected to benefit over the next 5 years, 95% of the total. Those purchasing an average £208,000 property will benefit to the tune of £1,660, while some will be £5,000 better off, according to the Treasury. Mr. Hammond said the cut, which will cost the Exchequer £600 million a year and come into force immediately, would be teamed with a wider £44 billion push to build 300,000 extra new homes a year by the mid-2020s, including in 5 new garden towns, and should revive the homeowning dream. But the independent OBR watchdog warned that the main gainers from the stamp duty break would actually be existing homeowners, as it would drive prices up. Chancellor Philip Hammond set out an optimistic view of Brexit, but admitted that growth forecasts had been slashed. Mr. Hammond was warmly congratulated by Damien Green, Left, and Mrs May after his speech in the House today. Growth has been downgraded, but national debt is thought to have peaked and will shrink as a share of the economy from 2019, pictured Left. The debt forecast is better than it was in March, pictured Right. Blue bars show the new forecast. Related articles previous. 1 next. School's £600 boost for every A-level maths pupil, Philip. British factory orders at their highest level since 1988. Next he'll be ordering a vodka martini. Jeremy Corbyn. Share this article. Share script dm.later, bundle, function, if, dm.rotator, new dm.rotator, p26, page size, 1, page count, 1.0, active class, active, rotate, false, $, number p26.share, .on, click, function, dms.facebook.post related. The overall budget package amounted to £25 billion net of extra spending over the next 5 years, and together with his notably more optimistic language on Brexit might well have won him a stay of execution after fevered speculation he could be sacked. Mr. Hammond insisted that despite the extra outlay he did not need to drop his target for eradicating the deficit by the middle of the next decade. Among the key announcements in Mr. Hammond's crucial second budget were pump billions into tackling the housing crisis, including a new target to build 300,000 homes a year and measures to make it easier for councils to build. Said the government would carry out direct intervention to ensure there was land available for construction, wooed younger voters with a cut in stamp duty for first-time buyers, and the extension of the young person's rail card to all under 30s, vowed £28 million to eradicate homelessness in cities by 2027 and devoted more money to addressing mental health conditions, allocate £2.8 billion more to the NHS over the next 2 years, but well below the £4 billion that has been requested by senior managers in the health service. Mr. Hammond insisted public sector workers must improve their productivity in return for an easing of the 1% pay cap. Mr. Hammond did not allocate more money to fund pay rises, but said he was ready to, if required, announced a 40% increase in Indiana research and development spending to make the UK a world leader in areas such as driverless cars and robotics. The Chancellor bowed to pressure not to increase fuel duty, and froze most alcohol duties apart from strong cider. Seriously wounded troops will get £4.5 million from the last of the Libor fines levied on misbehaving banks. The housing drive commits an additional £15.3 million in capital funding for the housing market, which will be made available over the next 5 years in loans and guarantees, bringing the total support offered by the government to £44 billion. House prices are increasingly out of reach for many, Mr. Hammond said. It takes too long to save for a deposit and rent absorb too high a portion of monthly income. When we say we will revive the home-owning dream in Britain, we mean it. The Chancellor said fixing the housing market was a crucial part of ensuring the younger generation were not the first since the Black Death to be less prosperous than their parents. Budget at a glance. Housing. Promise to build another 300,000 new homes a year paid for by £44 billion of capital funding, loans and guarantees over 5 years. Abolition of stamp duty for all first-time buyer home purchases up to £300,000. Welfare. 6-week wait for universal credit welfare payments to be cut to 5 weeks as part of £1.4 bn package of help. Transport. A £400 million fund to build electric car charging points, driverless cars to be put on Britain's streets by 2021 and Millennial Rail Card to give under 30s a third off train travel. New £1.7 billion Transforming Cities Fund to deliver local transport. Schools/training. Schools get £600 bounty for every extra pupil taking A-level maths, and over £80 million to train 12,000 computer science teachers. A new national retraining scheme will be created and given £30 million for construction training. NHS. An extra £12.8 billion given to the NHS, with £10 bn going to help the service plan for the future and an extra £2.8 bn for the current day-to-day budgets. This includes £350 million to deal with the coming winter. Investment and research. An extra £2.3 billion for research and development, National Productivity Investment Fund extended for a year and funding increased to over £31 bn. And £500 million for technology initiatives including artificial intelligence, 5G and full fibre broadband. Cigarettes and alcohol. Duties on most alcohol frozen, making a bottle of single malt whisky will be £1.15 cheaper. But cheap white ciders to be slapped with higher taxes, and tax on cigarettes will go up by 2% plus inflation. Fuel. Fuel duty will be frozen again, making it the longest freeze for 40 years. Tax. Workers to get a £350 a year pay boost as the personal income tax threshold rises to £11,850 from next April. New crackdown on tax avoidance and evasion forecast to raise £4.8 bn by 2022/23. Grenfell. A further £28 million to pay for mental health services of those hit by the Grenfell Tower fire. Environment. Consultation on a new levy on plastic rubbish. Business. Businesses to save £2.3 bn over 5 years as ministers bring forward the switch from RPI to CPI measure of inflation in calculating business rates to next April. Brexit. An extra £3 billion set aside for Brexit preparations. Public sector pay cap. Mr. Hammond signalled he will lift the 1% public sector pay cap for NHS staff. He did not allocate new funding for the move, but hinted he might find extra cash in future. He promised the government would do whatever it takes to get homes built, including cracking down on land banking and underwriting loans to small house builders. There will be direct state intervention, including a program of buying land, and local authorities will be able to charge a 100% council tax premium on empty properties. As part of a long-term battle to achieve and sustain affordability, he said new town development corporations would be used to kickstart 5 new garden towns in areas of demand pressure. Some £28 million is being committed to a goal of ending homelessness in cities by 2027, Mr. Hammond said. But his house building plans fell short of Local Communities Secretary Sajid Javid's recent call to borrow £50 bn to fund a massive house building programme. The stamp duty move, which will only apply in Scotland if the government there approves it, was also called into question by the OBR. Despite the Treasury saying first-time buyers of a £500,000 house could save £5,000, and a cost to the Exchequer of around £600 million a year, the watchdog's analysis said the gains were likely to be passed on to sellers in higher prices. The main gainers from the policy are people who already own property, not the first-time buyers themselves, the OBR said. Official figures this week showed more than 217,000 homes were built last year, nearly a third less than Mr. Hammond's new target. The initial reaction at Westminster was that the Chancellor appeared to have done enough to get a stay of execution, after rumours he was destined for the axe in a New Year reshuffle. A gaffe-ridden package could spell disaster for Mrs May's government, which is reeling from sex harassment scandals, cabinet resignations, and the threat of defeat on the Brexit bill. Eurosceptic MPs were cheered that Mr. Hammond immediately took a more upbeat approach on the UK's future outside the EU, after he came under heavy fire for an IERE attitude. In his most optimistic remarks for months, Mr. Hammond said the UK would run towards the future of Brexit. While we work to achieve this deep and special partnership, we are determined to ensure that the country is prepared for every possible outcome, he said. We have already invested almost £700 million in Brexit preparations, and today I am setting aside over the next 2 years another £3 billion, and I stand ready to allocate further sums if and when needed. No one should doubt our resolve. Mr. Hammond admitted at the weekend that his ambitions for this afternoon did not stretch beyond presenting a balanced budget. Downing Street was so concerned about the lackluster details briefed to journalists overnight that it stepped in to insist more information about education announcements were released. Mrs May tried to downplay the tensions this morning by tweeting a supportive message with a picture saying Mr. Hammond would be setting out the government's blueprint for the future. But the Chancellor had little room for manoeuvre on the government's finances as the economy has slowed down, while productivity gains have stayed stubbornly low. In his speech, Mr. Hammond said that for the first time in decades, Britain is genuinely at the forefront of a technological revolution, not just in our universities and research institutes, but this time in the commercial development labs of our great companies and on the factory floors and business parks across the land. So we must invest to secure a bright future for Britain, and at this budget that is what we choose to do, he will add. Mr. Hammond said he had previously set aside £26 billion as a Brexit warchest, adding, "Now I choose to use some of the headroom I established then so that as well as reducing debt, we can also invest in Britain's future, support our key public services, keep taxes low, and provide a little help to families and businesses under pressure. A balanced approach, that will prepare Britain for the future, not seek to hide from it." Mr. Hammond said the tight economic landscape would not stop him being bold about Brexit and pledged to use some of the money. An economy that continues to grow, continues to create jobs than ever before, and continues to confound those who seek to talk it down. An economy set on a path to a new relationship with our European neighbours and a new future outside the EU, he said. A future full of change, new challenges, and above all full of new opportunities. And in this budget, we express our resolve to look forwards, not backwards. To embrace that change, to meet those challenges head-on, and to seize those opportunities for Britain. The negotiations on our future relationship with the EU are in a critical phase. The Prime Minister has been clear that we seek a deep and special partnership, based on free and frictionless trade in goods and services, close collaboration on security. Setting out the cash for the NHS, Mr. Hammond said he recognised that services were under pressure right now. "I am therefore exceptionally, and outside the spending review process, making an additional commitment of resource funding of £2.8 billion to the NHS in England, £350 million immediately to allow trusts to plan for this winter, and £1.6 billion in 2018-19, with the balance in 2019-20, taking the extra resource into the NHS next year to £3.75 billion in total." How will the stamp duty cut work? The stamp duty cut for first-time buyers will remove all buying their first home for £300,000 or less from the tax net, saving them up to £5,000. The cut will also apply for the first £300,000 of a purchase price for first-time buyers paying up to £500,000 for a home, something that is common in London. These higher-value home first-time buyers will save the first £5,000 of their stamp duty bill and only pay the remainder in tax. So, for example, a first-time buyer in London paying £450,000 for a flat would previously have paid £12,500 but would now pay £7,500, as they are only charged on the sum above £300,000. Confusingly, the new first-time buyer exemption doesn't chime with the stamp duty thresholds. It covers £300,000, but stamp duty kicks in at 2% from £125,000 to £250,000 and then 5% from £250,000 up to £925,000. Overall, the Chancellor is spending £25 billion more over the next 5 years. Treasury sources said, what the government is committed to do is to meet its fiscal rules. It's not austerity for austerity's sake. We are meeting the fiscal rules by some margin. One rule is to get debt falling by 2021, it's falling in 2018, 19, 20, and 2021. There is a commitment to get the finances back in balance by the middle of the decade. Mr. Hammond bowed to pressure from motorists not to slap additional tax on petrol and diesel in the budget. Campaign group Fair Fuel Look said that more than 30,000 supporters had emailed the Chancellor over 48 hours with a plea for him not to hit families and businesses who are struggling to make ends meet in order to win green credentials for his budget. He announced a £180 million investment in maths teaching, arguing that better workplace maths skills are essential to ensure the UK remains a competitive force in the global marketplace. Schools and colleges will receive an additional £600 for every extra pupil studying Maths A-level, allowing them to invest in better provision. Teachers in underperforming schools will be offered training grants worth up to £1,000 each to improve their skills. Mr. Hammond set aside more than £80 million to train an extra 8,000 computer science teachers. Treasury sources hailed an innovative and novel extension to the so-called Google tax. The OBR fiscal watchdog had dramatically slashed growth estimates for the coming years, including from 2% to 1.5% this year, left. Mr. Hammond said the deficit would still fall every year, but by less than previously thought. Ms May was flanked by the Chancellor as she took PMQs in the House before the budget was delivered. Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn said he believed the budget package would quickly unravel as he responded in the House. Health and social protection dominates the government's spending, left. The Tories have promised to raise the higher tax rate threshold, but the plans may be pushed back towards the end of the Parliament. Last year Mr. Hammond ditched George Osborne's target of eradicating the deficit by 2019, instead saying it must go by the mid-2020s. It will still be £25 billion in 2023 on the new forecast, pictured left. Families have been feeling the squeeze as inflation has risen faster than wages over recent months, pictured right. Lewis Hamilton tax to hit private jet owners. Sorry Lewis. Hammond is charging APD on private jet flights. Philip Hammond today unveiled new reforms to air passenger duty that will see private jet owners like Lewis Hamilton paying for a freeze on rates in economy class. The F1 champion, who hit the headlines after it emerged he legally avoided tax when buying his jet, will have to pay an extra £47 every time he flies from the UK. The new levy will also hit business class flyers as the Chancellor scrambles to raise extra revenue without punishing holiday makers. In his budget speech, Mr. Hammond quipped, "From April 2019, I will again freeze short-haul air passenger duty rates and I will also freeze long-haul economy rates, paid for by an increase on premium class tickets, and on private jets." Sorry Lewis. Campaigners bemoaned the announcement as a missed opportunity to cut APD rates and bring them into line with taxes charged in other European countries. Reforms established by George Osborne allowed HMRC to collect tax on revenues earned on UK digital search activity even if it was generated via software working offshore. Companies, including search engines such as Google and social media firms, got around the new tax by running the activity via a third country. The new measure allows the UK to exploit bilateral tax agreements with more than 100 countries to lay a claim to the revenue, raising more than £500 million in extra tax over the next 5 years. The source admitted the third country could collect the tax themselves and stop it being returned to Britain, meaning revenues decline over time. But they said the Treasury hoped the internet firms would be forced to effectively onshore activities taking place in Britain anyway. The source said, "This is not a silver bullet for all of the public's concerns about the digital economy. There is much more to do, but this is a sensible and pragmatic measure." He made clear his determination to pitch for millennial votes by announcing plans to get 300,000 homes built a year. Mr. Hammond is regarded as on a final warning after his first budget package in March unraveled within days over a proposed hike to national insurance contributions for more than 2.4 million self-employed. The Chancellor initially seemed unaware that the plan smashed a Tory manifesto pledge, and amid a massive backlash Mrs May humiliatingly forced him to drop it. He has also enraged Brexiters with gloomy pronouncements on Britain's future outside the EU, with some openly demanding Mrs May replace him with a more optimistic figure. There had been strong signs that Mr. Hammond was destined for the chop after the election. But Mrs May's poor showing left her too weak to make dramatic changes to her top team. The Chancellor has again been tipped for the sack in a New Year reshuffle if this week's budget is a flop. Jeremy Corbyn predicted the package would unravel within days, warning misery will continue for people across the country. The Chancellor and Mrs May sent coordinated tweets today as they tried to play down claims of tensions. Mrs May is hoping the budget can get her government back on track after a series of crises that saw the resignations of Sir Michael Fallon, front row, third from left, and Priti Patel, middle row on the right, from Cabinet. Mrs May's deputy Damien Green, front row on the left of the PM, is still under investigation over sleaze claims. Mr. Hammond has been coming under pressure from motorists not to slap additional tax on petrol and diesel in the budget after years of freezes, left. The 20% and 40% thresholds have been rising slowly over recent years, right. Polluting plastics set for heavy new green taxes. The government has addressed calls to tackle the issue of single-use containers, which includes coffee cups and packaging. The most polluting plastics could be taxed in plans to tackle the scourge of littering following a mail campaign. Chancellor Philip Hammond announced a consultation on taxes or charges on single-use plastics to cut down on waste. His pledge follows a shocking Blue Planet 2 episode in which the death of a pilot whale calf was blamed on plastic contamination. Environment campaigners and MPs welcomed the news, though called for action as soon as possible. Yesterday's budget announcement was designed to position Britain as a world leader on tackling the issue, Mr. Hammond said. He said he and Environment Secretary Michael Gove would investigate how the tax system and charges on single-use plastic items could reduce waste. Audiences across the country, glued to Blue Planet 2, have been starkly reminded of the problems of plastics pollution, the Chancellor said. The UK led the world on climate change agreements, and is a pioneer in protecting marine environments. Now I want us to become a world leader in tackling the scourge of plastic, littering our planet and our oceans. Now, the government has addressed calls to tackle the issue of single-use containers, which includes coffee cups and packaging. In the UK alone, the amount of disposable plastic wasted every year would fill the Royal Albert Hall 1,000 times over. More than 2.5 billion disposable cups are thrown away every year in the UK, which equates to around 7 million every day. Just 1 in 400 is recycled. The Labour leader said pay was lower than in 2010 and wages were falling, adding that economic growth in the first 3 quarters of this year was the lowest since 2009. He told the Commons, "It's a record of failure with a forecast of more to come." Responding to Mr. Hammond's statement, Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn told the House of Commons, "The reality will be a lot of people will be no better off and the misery that many are in will be continuing." Proceedings did not get off to a good start over the weekend as he committed a series of gaffes during TV interviews. Mr. Hammond was embarrassingly forced to issue a correction after declaring there were no unemployed people. The comment came as he argued that developments in technology need not lead to mass unemployment. Nobody has a shorthand typist these days, but where are all these unemployed people, he said. There are no unemployed people. In a separate interview an hour later, Mr. Hammond acknowledged that 1.4 million were out of work. Asked about his error, he said, "I didn't mean that. There's 1.4 million unemployed people in this country and that's 1.4 million too many." Labour seized on the slip as evidence that the Chancellor was out of touch. John Trickett, Labour's Cabinet Office spokesman, said, "The Chancellor is living on another planet." Mr. Hammond was also caught up in a row over funding after directly criticising the performance of the health service. NHS Chief Executive Simon Stevens has called for an extra £4 billion in cash to tackle the growing crisis in the healthcare system. But the Chancellor said he had yet to deliver on efficiency reforms agreed as part of a 5-year plan that led to a £10 billion increase in NHS funding. "I'll just remind you that Simon Stevens drew up the NHS 5-year view back in 2014, he told the BBC's Andrew Marr show. He was the one who set the envelope of resource that he asked the government for £10 billion extra by 2020. We agreed to fund that and that plan is not at the moment being delivered." NHS England hit back, highlighting a number of statements from Mr. Stevens claiming the NHS got less than we asked for in return for the 5-year plan. Mr. Stevens also asked the government to tackle demand by taking action to address the crisis in obesity and social care, none of which has happened. Mr. Hammond also caused dismay in Downing Street by announcing that he would be taking a ride in a driverless vehicle before the budget. But after a rash of jokes about the fragile state of Theresa May's leadership, aides stepped in to ensure the photo opportunity never happened. Last night Downing Street was forced to rush out an announcement on school funding to offset concerns over the lack of fanfare surrounding Mr. Hammond's budget. The Treasury had insisted that no policy announcements would be made, however it was forced into a spectacular U-turn just hours later. The Chancellor insisted he did not deserve his gloomy reputation, saying, "If you stick your head above the parapet there will be people who take pot shots at it. I spent most of the year listening to predictions of my demise. In the meantime I'm just getting on with the job." The state pension makes up for the bulk of social security spending, but the government has made clear it will not drop the triple lock that ensures they go up by the highest out of inflation earnings, or 2.5%, left. Unemployment is at a 40-year low despite the relative slowdown in the economy, right? Buyers of new diesel cars will be slapped with a tax bill of up to £500 extra as Hammond announces plans to crack down on air pollution. Buyers of new diesel cars will be hit with a tax rise of up to £500 under plans to crack down on air pollution unveiled by Chancellor Philip Hammond today. He said new polluting diesel cars will rise one bracket up the vehicle excise duty system from April next year for the first year. This means drivers buying a car could have to spend up to £2,000 a year getting it taxed. The rise excludes all vehicles bigger than cars, including white vans, to protect small businesses, Mr. Hammond said as he unveiled his budget. The change means drivers of new diesel cars will face rises from £15 for a year to up to £500 for the most polluting diesel vehicles. Mr. Hammond told MPs today that no white van man or white van woman will be hit by the looming rise. Current diesel cars will all rise one bracket up the vehicle excise duty system, hitting millions of car owners. But motoring groups reacted with fury to the looming rise, branding it unnecessary and hits ordinary Britons who rely in their cars and are already feeling the squeeze. The Chancellor said upcoming models which meet new air quality standards would not be hit by the higher charges. But he said the future of motoring was in electric and driverless cars as the government pressed ahead with its plans to end the era of petrol and diesel altogether. The Chancellor announced, "We published our air quality plan earlier this year and we said then that we would fund it through taxes on new diesel cars. From April 2018 the first-year VED rate for diesel cars that don't meet the latest standards will go up by 1 band and the existing diesel supplement in company car tax will increase by 1%. Drivers buying a new car will be able to avoid this charge as soon as manufacturers bring forward the next generation cleaner diesels that we all want to see. And we only apply the measures to cars. So before the headline writers start limbering up, let me be quite clear. No white van man, or woman, will be hit by these measures. Chancellor freezes duties on beer, wine, and whiskey, but Hammond reveals new levies on white ciders while hiking tax on cigarettes. Philip Hammond froze duties on most alcohol today but announced a new crackdown on cheap white ciders with higher taxes. The Chancellor said he wanted to cut consumption of high-volume, low-cost alcohol and said he would change the law to increase tax on them. But other products such as beer, spirits, and wine will not be increased, allowing the Chancellor to claim a bottle of single malt whiskey will be £1.15 cheaper. Tobacco taxes will continue to spiral, as an escalator of inflation, currently running at 3% or plus 2% will continue. Products such as beer, spirits, and wine will not be increased, allowing the Chancellor to claim a bottle of single malt whiskey will be £1.15 cheaper. The Chancellor announced, the tobacco duty escalator will continue at inflation plus 2% with an additional 1% duty on hand-rolling tobacco this year, and minimum excise duty on cigarettes will also rise. Excessive alcohol consumption by the most vulnerable people is all too often through cheap, high-strength, low-quality products, especially so-called white ciders. I want to pay tribute to the campaign led by Congleton MP Fiona Bruce on this issue. Following our recent consultation, we will legislate to increase duty on these products from 2019. But recognizing the pressure on household budgets and backing our great British pubs, duties on other ciders, wines, spirits, and on beer will be frozen. This will mean a bottle of whiskey will be £1.15 less in 2018. Hammond announces a U-turn on universal credit, saying the 6-week wait will be cut. Philip Hammond announced changes to universal credit amid concern about families being forced to use food banks, post-file image, because of payment delays. Philip Hammond today announced a £1.5 billion package of measures to cut the waiting time for universal credit after facing a backbench Tory revolt over the benefit. The reform brings together 6 different benefits and ensures that work always pays by tapering off payments. But the Chancellor faced major pressure to reform the policy after warnings families were being pushed into poverty by the 6-week wait for their benefit. Labour MPs and Tory backbenchers had warned that Britons were being forced to use food banks as Christmas approaches because of delays in getting their payments. Unveiling his budget today, Mr. Hammond said he recognised the concerns that many have over the reforms and announced a package of measures to address them. He said the waiting time will be cut from 6 to 5 weeks, while payments to claimants needing emergency cash before their benefit comes through will be extended. Hammond invests £12.8 billion extra in the NHS to make it fit for the future, including £350 million more for this winter. Philip Hammond today handed £12.8 billion extra to the NHS, insisting he was making the health service fit for the future. The Chancellor said there would be an extra £2.8 billion on top of the current day-to-day budgets, including £350 million to deal with the coming winter. And he said £10 billion in capital would be spent preparing the NHS for the future. Mr. Hammond hailed a higher-than-ever number of operations and a 20-year high in patient satisfaction. The Chancellor has been under growing pressure both inside and outside government to deliver the Vote Leave pledge for £350 million a week for the NHS. The Chancellor has been under growing pressure both inside and outside government to deliver the Vote Leave pledge for £350 million a week for the NHS. NHS Chief Executive Simon Stevens has warned the health service is braced for a tough winter and needs more money to deal with long-term rises in demand. And announcing new cash, he said, we will deliver an additional £10 billion package of capital investment over the course of this Parliament, to support the sustainability and transformation plans which will make our NHS more resilient. Investing for an NHS which is fit for the future. But we also recognise that the NHS is under pressure right now. I am therefore exceptionally, and outside the spending review process, making an additional commitment of resource funding of £2.8 billion to the NHS in England, including £350 million immediately to allow trusts to plan for this winter, and £1.6 billion in 2018-19, with the balance in 19-20, taking the extra resource into the NHS next year to £3.75 billion in total. Hammond burns the midnight oil ahead of Budget Day. A lone light shines at the Chancellor's home at N011 Downing Street at 4:30 am this morning ahead of Philip Hammond's make-or-break budget. Philip Hammond was burning the midnight oil as he put the finishing touches to his make-or-break budget in the early hours of this morning. A single light was on at N011 Downing Street at 4:30 am this morning ahead of the Chancellor's big set piece. Mr. Hammond is under huge pressure to deliver a blunder-free budget today. Many within the Tory party have hit out at his Eeyore-ish pessimism and would seize on any gaffe to demand he is sacked from the top job. While many backbenchers have urged him to turn the spending taps on and signal an end to austerity to stave off the threat from Jeremy Corbyn's Labour. Today's budget is widely seen as make or break for the Chancellor. And if it flops, it will be a major blow to Theresa May's authority too, as her government reels from sex scandals, cabinet resignations, and the threat of defeats on the Brexit bill.